table here is the General Secretary of the PPP. You have former President Comrade Ranitar, Executive Member Comrade Judiciary, and Comrade Ali Nandalal, Central Committee Member of the party. We'll be having the General Secretary making a statement. He'll be followed by Comrade Nandalal, then Comrade Judiciary, and then former President. Comrade General Secretary.
Thank you, Comrade. My statement reads as follows. 23 years ago, on October the 5th, 1992, the People's Progressive Party, after 28 years in the political wilderness, was elected to office with Chelly Jagan as President of the Republic. The party was elected to office under the election campaign slogan, "Time for change, time to rebuild." It was a momentous occasion that raised the hopes and aspirations of the Guyanese workers, farmers, intellectuals, the business community, and indeed the Guyanese people as a whole. Those 23 years were the longest the PPP was ever in office. At every single election since 1992 up to May 11, 2015, when it was once again, as was in the case of 1964, cheated out of office, the PPP continuously and convincingly won each election, the challenges it faced notwithstanding. It is to be recalled that in 1953, having won the elections in that year, the PPP was in office for a mere 133 days, following the suspension of the Constitution by the British government, which led to the party's removal from office. Later, in 1957, following the victory at the elections held in that year, the PPP remained in office up to 1964, when it was cheated out of office due to a combination of Anglo-American and local conspiracies and a change in electoral system from first-past post to proportional representation. During these 7 years, the PPP accomplished many of its progressive social and economic policies, such as education reform, revamping the agricultural sector, industrialization, an advanced health sector, establishment of the University of Guyana, the Bank of Guyana, and the Guyana School of Agriculture, to mention a few. The PPP has always held that, so long as free and fair elections are held in Guyana, the party will emerge victorious. This strongly held conviction was no mere statement punctuated by high-sounding words, nor a political assertion of our belief in the doctrine of divine providence. This conviction was in effect an ode to the working people of Guyana, in whom the PPP had deep, abiding faith, respect, and trustworthiness, while they, in a spirit of reciprocity and generosity, at every election would demonstrate their confidence and support by voting for the PPP so that they can enjoy a life full of happiness and prosperity. It must be emphasized, however, that, as if reflecting on the lyrics of Jimmy Cliff's, "It's a hard road to travel, a rough, rough way to go," for the PPP in office, it was no easy sailing. At every twist and turn while the PPP was in office, political subterfuge, economic sabotage, social upheaval and unrest, demagoguery, parliamentary malpractices, and injudicial decisions were the order of the day. But these difficulties notwithstanding, the PPP persevered, while at the same time offering political solutions to the political, economic, and social crisis affecting the country, all of which were either rejected or undermined as a result of lack of political will and the lust for political power by the PNC, presently clothed in the garb of the APNU. This is precisely the backdrop in which the PPP came to power in 1992, on October the 5th. After 28 years in the political opposition, which at that time was characterized by rigged elections, corruption in high places, racial and political discrimination, victimization, intimidation, harassment, and physical elimination of political opponents. The party's victory at the polls in '92 saw the dawn of a new era, demonstrated in a complete break with the dark and ominous past of the Barnum-Hoyt administration, in which many of those who now walk the corridors of power are still associated. Parliamentary democracy was given a shot in the arm. A fresh breeze began blowing through the hallowed chambers of the judiciary and the magistracy, and the executive became increasingly accountable to the people and the international community through elections at the national level and covenants, treaties, protocols, and conventions and agreements signed by the government and state under the PBPC at the international level. For 23 years, the PBP labored in the vineyards at the national and regional levels, delivering and implementing people-centered policies and programs whose fulfillment resulted in raising the living standards of the Guyanese working people, opening up opportunities for the private sector, expanding and facilitating the growth and development of the national economy, and constantly reinventing, reshaping, and refashioning governance structures in our country, guaranteeing the independence of the judiciary, promoting the robusteness and vibrancy of Parliament, and pursuing a policy of peace, regional and international security and cooperation with our immediate neighbors and all countries of the world in the wider context of a new global human order based on mutual respect, inviolability of borders, and the protection of our national integrity and sovereignty. The PPP stands proud of its record in government, notwithstanding the bleatings of doomsayers, a hostile media, the brutal vengeance visited upon thousands of workers and others by a vicious and vengeful group of witch hunters, hatchet men and women, acting on behalf of the APNU-AFC coalition administration, coupled with the revival of discriminatory practices both at a racial and political level. Of recent vintage is the return to the past practice of vote rigging and manipulation. It disregarded PPs of the strong view that, as it was in 1992, the time has come for a fresh set of reforms at GCOM, which the party has already made public of its intention to pursue at the domestic and international levels. Having returned to where we were prior to October 5, 1992, albeit under qualitatively new conditions, internally and externally, the PPP is resolved to wage a relentless and determined struggle against all malpractices by the de facto APNU-AFC Granger-led coalition administration in and out of Parliament. Our slogan should be no more than 5 years for the APNU-AFC at Chief Chandrapal Drive. Thereafter, armed with a successful petition with angry rice farmers and sugar workers, and the many disaffected, disillusioned, and disappointed Guyanese working people behind and in front of us, who would have already discarded the empty promise of a good life, the PBP will once again return to office, placing Guyana once again on its rightful path to economic and social development with a human face and a foreign policy characterized by good neighborliness, peace, and international cooperation with all countries of the world in pursuance of a new global human order. In observance and celebration of October the 5th, 92, the PPP will be organizing a number of events throughout the country. Among the activities will be 3 symposia in Demerara, Berbice, and Essequibo. The symposium in Demerara will be held at Red House, Kingston, on Wednesday, October 7, 2015, at 4:30 p.m. October 5th activities will include sports competitions, panel discussions, family fun days, cultural activities, lectures, and outreaches in all 10 administrative regions. Thank you.
My statement is titled The Judiciary and the Legal Sector, advancements made from October 5th, 1992 to May 11, 2015. Democracy under threat. Under our constitutional system of government, governmental power is constitutionally devolved broadly into three organs, namely the executive, legislature, and the judiciary. The PPP has always viewed the judiciary, its functional independence and efficiency, and indeed the legal sector as indispensable to social and economic progress. Indeed, we are of the view that the judiciary is that institution of extraordinary importance which keeps the executive and the legislature in check against abuse of power, and it is to that organ that the citizenry can turn for redress against violation of their fundamental rights and freedoms, against executive excesses, and for maintenance of the rule of law. In its absence, anarchy, social decay, and economic stagnation will inevitably prevail. Against this philosophical backdrop, the PPP in successive governments since 1992 invested heavily in strengthening and modernizing the judiciary and the legal sector, with special emphasis in ensuring that all of our people, wherever they may be geographically located, irrespective of their race, class, or economic station, have equal access to the justice system and that they benefit from the rule of law. In 1992, we were well aware of the type of legal system which we inherited, one in which the PNC flag was flown in the compound of the Court of Appeal, at that time Guyana's highest court, demonstrating to the world that the judiciary was subject to political influence and interference. In order to restore judicial independence in Guyana, President Chedi Jagan, in one of his first CARICOM Heads of Government Summit, called upon the leaders of CARICOM in 1993 to urgently establish a Caribbean Court of Justice as a final court in the region, and indicated that if it is not done early, Guyana will re-establish its link with the Privy Council as Guyana's final Court of Appeal. Hence, when the Caribbean Court of Justice became a reality in 2005, Guyana was one of the first countries to amend its laws and make that court Guyana's final Court of Appeal. To date, many states of CARICOM are yet to follow suit. Physical infrastructure. In terms of physical infrastructure, we have refurbished or rebuilt brand new courthouses right across the length and breadth of Guyana, with those built or refurbished over the last 5 years being equipped with air conditioning units. Courthouses built in the interior areas are built with living quarters for magistrates so that they can sit for longer periods. Under the PPP administration, Region 10 was made a magisterial district. Region 9 will also be soon made a magisterial district, an arrangement put into place while we were in government. A new building to house the Lethem Magistrate Court with living quarters for the magistrate along with a magisterial sub-office were built under our government and will soon be open. Contracts have already been awarded under the PPP Civic Administration for the construction of 2 magistrates' courts at Sparendam, East Coast Demerara, and a land court in the compound of the High Court in Georgetown. The new government should answer why the Lethem Court has not yet been opened and why work has not yet begun on the buildings at Sparendam and in the High Court compound for the land court. It was under the PPP Civic Administration that a new edifice was constructed at Sodi, Essequibo, to accommodate both criminal as well as civil jurisdiction of the High Court in Essequibo for the first time in our history. Residents of Essequibo Coast are now having their cases heard and determined in that county without them having to make long and expensive journeys to Georgetown. Over the last 10 years alone, new courthouses were built at Wismar, Lethem, Georgetown, Providence, New Amsterdam, Fort Wellington, Weldad, Kanji, Wim, Number 51 Village, Wales, Charity, Leonora, Sisters Village, Maikoni, and Blackbush Polder, and I may not have mentioned all. A new family court building has been constructed and furnished for the first time in our history. It is yet to be opened by the new government. When it will be opened is another question that the government must be made to answer. Delay. Speed is an ever-present component in every judicial system. The principle is captured aptly in the well-known cliché, justice delayed is justice denied. When the PPP took office in 1992, the average time it took for a civil case to come up for trial was between 7 to 10 years. From 92 to now, I can safely say that litigation rate has quadrupled in Guyana. Yet in the face of this increase in litigation, in the year 2015, the average time for a civil case to come up for trial is below 4 years, a commercial case less than 3 years, and in a constitutional or public law case within a year. These achievements were made with the executive branch of government partnering with the judiciary in a number of innovative measures, all financed by the executive. These initiatives include the establishment of specialized court within the civil jurisdiction of the High Court. So for the first time in Guyana's history, a commercial court was established in 2006, a constitutional and administrative law court established in 2010, and a family court yet to be established, yet to be opened by the new government. These specialized courts are assigned specific judges who exclusively hear and determine cases filed before them. This initiative has drastically reduced the time these cases hitherto took to be heard and determined. Another initiative embarked upon, which was designed to bring speed to the judicial system, was the mechanism of mediation. In 2006, mediation by statute was formally introduced in our legal system. Today, the legal system boasts of dozens of trained mediators. Mediation centers were built and established in the compound of the High Court, both at Georgetown and in New Amsterdam. In order to bring greater dispatch to the system, in 2007, the PPP Civic Administration enacted the Time Limit for Judicial Decisions Act, which mandates judges to deliver their decisions within 6 months after a trial is concluded. This is the only legislation of its type in the entire Caribbean. Unfortunately, it is observed more in the breach. A series of legislation were also passed, bringing modern procedural reform in the area of criminal law, while at the same time enhancing the pace at which criminal cases are heard and determined. For example, the paper committal and plea bargaining legislation, both designed to bring faster rate of conclusion to criminal matters. In 2014, President Ramotar issued a historic order increasing for the first time in 40 years the number of judges which form the statutory complement in the High Court. It was 12. By that order issued by President Ramotar, it was increased to 20. Judicial independence. It is beyond doubt that independence is the hallmark of a strong and competent judiciary. As far as I am aware, not a single allegation has ever been made by the judiciary, including the magistracy, that there was any attempt at political interference with the judiciary while the PPPC was in government. Indeed, I have already alluded to the PPP government signing on to the CCJ as Guyana's final court of appeal, thereby boosting the independence of the judiciary. It was under President Barra Jagdeo that over 200 constitutional amendments were made as recommended by a broad-based constitutional reform commission. These sweeping changes brought greater democratic and rights-oriented reforms to the 1980 Constitution. The fundamental rights and freedom of the Guyanese people were expanded. Rights Commission established. Parliamentary oversight and participation were enhanced. Executive powers and immunities of the presidents were reduced. Term limit for presidents was introduced, and judicial independence was strengthened. The composition of the Judicial Service Commission was reformed, and the appointment process for persons to sit on that commission was altered to include a greater input from the parliamentary opposition as well as the legal profession. Significantly, an amendment was passed to the effect that the Chancellor of the Judiciary and the Chief Justice can only be appointed with the agreement of the Leader of the Opposition. Guyana is only the second country in the world to have such a provision in its constitution. Another significant amendment which was made to bolster judicial independence was the President's power to appoint judges was circumscribed to the effect that if the Judicial Service Commission recommends a person to be appointed a judge and the President refuses, the JSC can reconsider the matter and recommend that person again. After this second recommendation from the JSC, the President must appoint that person. Perhaps the strongest indication that the judiciary functioned independently under successive PPPC administration since 1992 can be garnered from the fact that though we have had a series of rigged elections under the PNC from 1973 to 1985, and although each of those elections were challenged in the court, none was ever set aside as unlawful and irregular by the judiciary. However, the 1997 elections were set aside by a High Court judge as being unlawful and unconstitutional because of the use of a voter ID card, which was permitted to be used by a statute which enjoyed the support of all the political parties when it was passed in the National Assembly. The High Court judge who made that decision was not only elevated to sit in the Court of Appeal under the PVP Civic Administration, but was employed by the PVPC government after retirement as a consultant and then as a legal advisor to the Guyana Police Force, in which capacity she still functions. Legislation. Statutory reform was a constant item on the agenda of successive PVP civic governments since 1992. Almost every single area of the law benefited from these reforms. There was a common thread running through every single piece of legislation passed. It was the enhancement of the welfare of all of our people. The workers' welfare was advanced with legislation investing greater powers to them and their trade unions. Discrimination against workers was outlawed. Statutory rights to severance and termination benefits were enacted. Modern children legislation passed. The common law spouse was conferred with equal legal status as the legally married spouse. Modern legislation was passed to protect women and children from the scourge of domestic violence, sexual abuse, and trafficking in person. Strong legislation were passed with heavier penalties in respect of every form of criminal behavior, including piracy, possession and trafficking of firearms in whole or in part, kidnapping, narcotics, terrorism, money laundering, just to name a few. Significantly, a law revision exercise was completed after a 35 years lapse. A system of law reporting resumed after an absence of over 25 years. And today, of course, the laws of Guyana and the official gazette have been put online. Democracy under threat. From the above, though not exhaustive, I have chronicled sufficient materials to demonstrate that successive PVPC governments have put the judiciary and the legal, and indeed the legal sector, in a far better place than it was on October the 5th, 1992. Indeed, it is a track record that the current government will be hard-pressed to emulate, more so surpass. Unfortunately, the early signs that are visible would tend to suggest that the progress which have been made are being reversed. The President has already signaled, as he did as leader of the opposition, no confidence in persons acting as Chancellor and Chief Justice. He is still refusing to confirm them after they have been acting in those positions for over a decade. This cannot augur well for judicial independence. Hundreds of persons in the public sector have been unlawfully, unconstitutionally, and unfairly dismissed without the legal benefits to which they are entitled. Political hacks are installed in key positions in the state media. The Prime Minister has been accused of reprimanding a journalist who has written critical of the government in the Chronicle newspaper. Veteran journalist Mr. Ricky Singh has complained that the Chronicle has refused, upon the instructions of the Prime Minister, to publish an article critical of the PM. A unit has been established by the Office of the President with an apparent mandate to seize and expropriate private property. Indeed, an employee of that unit has launched legal proceedings to do so. The judiciary, therefore, instead of dispensing justice to people, is being used as a machinery to deny people justice by expropriating their property. As I speak right now, there is running in the newspapers a series of notices revoking a number of leases, long leases, given to rice farmers without hearing those rice farmers. These leases were granted by the MMA and under the hand of President Ramotar. These leases are being revoked. Farmers have paddy in the field, they have rice in the fields, and these leases are being revoked by a notice published in the newspapers, with these people not being notified or even given an opportunity to say why their leases should not be revoked. The Constitution and the procurement laws have been violated in the appointment of forensic auditors, whose mandate seem to be to unearth evidence which will be used to persecute political opponents. Persons are being imposed on boards in violation of the law without the persons themselves nor the organizations which they represent being consulted. The right to entertainment and leisure guaranteed by the Constitution are taken away by a minister who orders entertainment places to close their doors before 2 a.m. All of this has occurred in just 5 months in government. From all indication, it will only get worse. Indeed, democracy has been under threat since May 11, 2015. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Oh. Good morning, everybody. We're meeting on October 5th, 2015, a Monday, and in fact, it was a Monday when, on October 5th, 1992, the first free and fair elections were held in Guyana. This is date itself, and so it's to me, today is an important day, not only because of the date itself, but because of the day and the memories it brought back for me personally and for all of us sitting at this table about what we experienced on that day and the struggle that led to bring us to the point of one of what I believe is one of the most significant and decisive dates for Guyana and its people, as it signaled the restoration of democracy and the reconstruction of Guyana. It is also one of the first, it is the first of 5 PVPC governments to win the support of the electorate post-1964. I'm going to focus on the legislature in this whole issue of achievements of the PVPC in government and also the threats to democracy. As you know, there are 3 arms of the state: the executive, legislature, and the judiciary. And my comrade Anil has spoken extensively on the judiciary. And as you know, too, the parliament is made up of the executive and the National Assembly, with the president heading parliament and the Speaker of the House heading the National Assembly. But my focus today will be on the legislature, and that is mainly the National Assembly. When Dr. Jagan went to open the first parliament after the October 1992 elections, he made a commitment on behalf of the People's Progressive Party, Civic, that we wanted to make Parliament a deliberative forum, an accountable forum, and accountable to the people, transparent and accessible to the people, and one that would also be part of inclusivity, of building inclusivity in Guyana. From 1992 to 2015, the PVPC, under 5 different presidents, has remained loyal and faithful to these commitments. And as I said, that when we have the symposium, that we will give very detailed information on the fact that we're very proud of our track record of what we've achieved for parliamentary democracy over these years. One of the issues that you as journalists can all go and check yourself is what was the budget in 1992 for the parliament, for the legislature, and what it is today. It has gone up by approximately 10 times. And therefore, the parliament was cash-strapped and in 1992, and in 2015, the Parliament will always want more money, as every ministry probably wants more money, but the point is that it has not been stymied in the programs and that it has developed over time. The legislature has been transformed over these years as one of the most progressive in the Commonwealth as of the elections of May 2015. It does not have that pride of place anymore. The Parliament, prior to the change in government on May 2015, was seen as a forum for deliberations between the government and opposition in reaching consensus, whether it was on bills, on motions, on amendments to bills, but the focus was on consensus. And this has disappeared completely, not only in this Parliament, but has disappeared in the 10th Parliament that preceded it. Our track record in terms of questions to ministers, and I'll just use the 10th and 11th Parliament as examples, that questions to ministers, we know that under the 1965 to 1992 October, members of Parliament in the opposition, that is the PPP, and even at one point when WPA sat there, that questions were put to ministers of the PNC government, which were never answered. And one of probably the most historically important ones was to do with the Jonestown land which was distributed by the former government and never unknown to the Guyanese public and certainly never raised in Parliament. And Dr. Chetty Jagan had raised these questions prior to the massacre, which were left on the order paper, as many other, all the questions were left on the order paper. So I'm just using that as one example. In the 10th Parliament and the 11th Parliament, it is almost approximately 1,000 questions that have been put to ministers, including questions from backbenchers on the government side, that is the PPPC side, which have all been answered. Some have been so extensive that they have been presented in electronic version, including probably the most massive of all was the ones on the, what you call the Dutch Four canals, which included extensive maps and so on, dossiers that were this amount of paper that were put on CD-ROMs, which I believe no one in the opposition then read any of these documents, because based on some of the questions they're asking today and some of the public pronouncements shows that they haven't read any of the annual reports that were presented from the state agencies, etc. But probably one of the important and significant areas of Parliament was constitutional and parliamentary reform, in which parliamentary committees and sectoral committees were enshrined in the Constitution, where the Auditor General's role was enshrined in the Constitution vis-a-vis Parliament, and also the Public Accounts Committee. Very few constitutions have gone to the point of putting parliamentary committees into the Constitution. These are mostly seen as parliamentary matters and guided by the legislature, and in some countries they may be done by law. The constitutional parliamentary reforms ensured a democratic parliamentary framework that was inclusive and accountable. The standing orders were revised in 1997, 2006, and 2011, and they were revised based on the call of the opposition and the recognition by the then government that there were a number of anomalies that had to be addressed, including ensuring greater participation of the opposition and providing for expansion of the committee system, greater scrutiny of the government by the opposition through the use of the 4 sectoral committees, strengthening the Public Accounts Committee, strengthening the Auditor General's office, and also even more recently was the establishment of the Oversight Committee on the Security Sector and the Constitutional Reform Committee. It is just in passing that it is interesting in 2010, in the last Parliament, where the opposition controlled these committees, that the Oversight Committee never was established, and the Constitutional Reform Commission, chaired by no less than the present President, never met more than once. The track record, we are proud as a PPP and a PPPC of our track record in Parliament. And we are proud that the records cannot be played around to say anything than that. We are proud of our track record, of what we've done in the Guyana Parliament, the resolutions, motions, laws, bills, and the methodology of how we reach them. The number of select committees and parliamentary select committees that were able to reach consensus. However, as of January 2012 to now, and continuing, we have seen that there is a reversal of and different efforts to erode these parliamentary conventions, practices, rules, standing orders, and that every sitting since June 10, 2015, the standing orders have been under threat, eroded, undermined, and treated in a most, what we would say, politically expedient manner to allow the government, the new government, to do whatever it wants in Parliament, whenever it wants to do it in Parliament, and basically throwing out the door any concept or any commitment to what was in the previous parliaments of consensus seeking, of methodology between the government and opposition to reach agreement on a number of issues that came up on the order paper, including the manner in which they were presented. We also take note with great trepidation that now in the parliamentary committees there are ministers sitting on oversight committees, on the 4 sectoral oversight committees, and the Public Accounts Committee, which is the Oversight Committee of Government Expenditure. This flies in the face of the Constitution and in the standing orders, and in any political scientific approach to a parliament would know that this is absolute madness and a great travesty in terms of the oversight of the committee. But let me give you the most recent example, which you would know not about because it has not taken place in the realms of the parliament sitting. You are well aware that the leader of the opposition and the office of the leader are enshrined in the Constitution and in law. However, in the 11th Parliament, there is a very strange development that has taken place over the last few days. As you know, Dr. Jagdeo was sworn in as, elected as the leader of the opposition on August the 17th in the Parliament. As you know, May the 16th, President Granger was sworn in. There's a 5-month hiatus between May and today. And we have indicated that we are ready to set up our office as leader of opposition, and I was tasked by Dr. Jagdeo as the leader of opposition to follow through with Parliament to allow us to set up our offices by the time and before Parliament completes its recess, which we understand the date has been amended by the Speaker. However, almost 5 months after the May 16 transition from PPPC to APNU AFC government, the actual handing over of the assets of the Office of the Leader of the Opposition, which is purchased by the Parliament under the Office of the Leader of the Opposition budget and is kept for that office exclusively and whosoever occupies that office, that the handover from the previous Office of the Leader of Opposition to the present Leader of Opposition, Dr. Jagdeo, has not started, and it is rife with controversy. As I've said before, there's law legally allocating the benefits and facilities for the Leader of Opposition and for the Office of the Leader of Opposition. These are constitutionally enshrined and also in law. The Act also stipulates that the Office of the Leader of Opposition be provided rent-free and furnished. And this is reflected in the Parliament, budget under the Leader of Opposition in the 2015 budget, where the balance of what was not used prior to August is reflected of approximately $10 million out of the $15 million. The Parliament Office manages the implementation of these laws. Dr. Jagdeo, the current leading has chosen a different location from Mr. Granger's. That's his right. Mr. Granger chose to rent Mr. Nigel Hughes' office on Hatfield Street. We have chosen a different location, which we feel more comfortable with, and Dr. Jagan is prepared and ready, and we're all on the parliamentary group ready to get kicking, move in, and start having a home for the Office of Leader of Opposition. The transfer of the assets ought to have been concluded in a timely way. The transition arrangements between the outgoing PVPC government and the incoming APNU coalition government at the government level was thought to be the model, and that the rapid transition, including assets transfers, which as former cabinet members, laptops, cell phones, etc., had to be handed over. However, we have discovered as of this week such is not the case. The office of the former Leader of Opposition is now reported to be an office of the President under the Ministry of the Presidency, and it is an annex of the Office of the President. Different accounts of the assets are circulated. Physical inspection that we have had with the Parliament Office and the representative of the Office of the President failed to discover or disclose the whereabouts of listed assets. Available assets on instructions available assets are on instruction not being made available to the new office of the Leader of the Opposition. We have therefore decided that this matter will become an audit query, as well as we will be approaching this new entity that's called the State Assets Recovery Unit as to why what is reflected in the Parliament register as equipment, furniture bought for the Office of the Leader of the Opposition are not in the old office, nor are they available to us when raised. One of these is, just to use an example, laptops, which they have refused to hand over and do not wish to hand over. They say the laptops have personal stuff on it. They're not available at Hatfield Street either. They have been distributed apparently across Guyana. To whom? Maybe you can investigate that for us. Therefore, the use of the Office of the Opposition is being stymied, and that we understand the old office has been occupied by presidential advisors and being used. The latest in this saga took place on Saturday night, where we had indicated since Thursday that we would be bringing our vehicles, etc., to move whatever furniture was reconciled and equipment between the list of Parliament and the Office of Leader Opposition, or of the previous Office of Leader Opposition, and that we would move today, October 5th. On Saturday night, we were advised that Mr. Harman indicated through his emissaries to the Clerk of the National Assembly that they would not want us to move on October the 5th, that they were not ready. And they did not want us to proceed with our vehicles, etc., to the office, the Hatfield Street venue, to move anything from there. We have followed up with the clerk saying that if we cannot move on October the 5th, the Office of the President and the Ministry of the Presidency has to be able to say to us in how many days or weeks or months will you be available. This is a serious constitutional issue. And therefore, we have our building, we're ready to move, but this is the latest issue, and this is why we say that there are threats to the parliamentary democracy of our country. We make no bones about it, and the threats are not only in the sittings and the parliamentary committees, it now comes into the realm of what are constitutionally required implementation of establishing the Office of Leader of the Opposition. This has never happened before. We have never experienced this before. I mean, we in terms of a transition like this. In closing, we therefore, as a PPP and a PPC, acknowledge and observe the October 5th, 1992 and the achievements over the 23 years in building democracy. And we also note with deep and profound concern the erosion of a number of these achievements and the threats to this parliamentary democracy, which started in the 10th Parliament and is intensifying in the 11th. We call on all democratic and progressive forces to stand up for the protection and preservation of the democratic made in these years. Whether they voted for the PPP or not, that's not the issue. It is to protect and preserve the democratic gains. Because if those continue to be eroded, it will impact on all. And to prevent further reversals. And therefore, on this anniversary, we celebrate our achievements, but we also call on all Guyanese to stand up in defense of the democratic gains that we've made as a country, and to ensure that democracy is not threatened further, and that we're able to regain and protect all of our democratic and human rights in this country.
Thank you, and let me just assure you that it would be, my colleagues have made life a bit much easier for me.
Sorry, just a second. Let's get in place first. Yes,
Just to say, ladies and gentlemen of the press, that October 5th, 1992 will certainly remain one of the most important historical dates in the history of this country. It was the first time that our country began to experience, since its independence in 1966, first time it experienced democratic governance. And all Guyanese today would have been able to see the benefits of that. We have achieved greatly, and we're proud of our achievement over the years, taking into consideration what we inherited. It is quite laughable sometimes when you hear this government saying that they inherited a bankrupt economy. I don't think they know the meaning of the word bankrupt, because what they left in 1992 was a country with more than where the debt was more than 700% bigger than the economy, bigger than the GDP, and they left a broken infrastructure. Both the social and physical infrastructure of our country was broken. Our economy was run down, and we were practically the laughing stock of the Caribbean. Today, that situation has changed radically, and and the achievements of the PPP government has to be taken into the context of the tremendous opposition that we've had from the PNC, both violence and after 92, 97, 2001, 2011, and we also had some of that as well. And in the last three years, with them having a majority in the National Assembly, where they use their majority to stymie development in our society, our achievement has to be seen in that type of context. And just let me just very quickly say that over the last 9 years, from 2006 to 2014, our country had the longest period of economic growth, continuous economic growth, in its independent history. From 2006, 9 consecutive years of positive economic growth. At a time when the international community was struggling, they had a crisis from 2007, end of 2007, 2008. We had a serious financial and economic crisis that impacted heavily on the region, and our economy still continued to grow even in that type of context. And we were able to reduce the debts from more than 700% of our economy in 1992. We were able to bring it down tremendously to now 56.9% of our economy now. From 700 at the end of 2014, it was only 56% of our economy. It was the best debt profile in the whole Caribbean. And as far as foreign debt is concerned, it's the total debt. It is about 39% of our economy, which is a tremendous achievement by any stretch of the imagination. Therefore, we have also been able to lift the economy. We have built the economy over and over again. That just take from 2006. The economy was 1.4 billion United States dollars. At the end of 2014, it was 3.1 billion United States dollars. We practically built another Guyana from 2006 to now. So our achievements is tremendous. But this achievement, these are statistics, but it is translated into people's life by massive housing development all over our country. When we got into office, we had a terrible situation in housing, and now our stock of housing has increased tremendously. Our infrastructure has been not only repaired but expanded and developed completely, and that has contributed tremendously to the dynamism in our economy that we have witnessed. Our education system has been overhauled. You see that we had about 10% passes at mathematics in 1992. Last year, at the end of this year, we had about almost 50% passes in English, and the strides are there for all to see. And we were working diligently. In fact, some regions have already reached universal secondary education. Our intention was to have the whole country reach universal secondary education by next year. So as far as health is concerned, I remember in 1992 when I was campaigning for the elections, one of my favorite shot in attacking the then PNC government was to hold up an article that was published in the Stabroek News, where a 5-year-old child had her hand eaten off by a rat at the public hospital. At that very hospital now, we are doing open heart surgery, kidney transplant, and we wanted to even expand that more by bringing on specialty hospitals. Unfortunately, the government of the day has not followed up on our program, and our economy is now falling like a stone. It is dropping like a stone. Importation, as far as I understand, is about half of what it used to be at the beginning of the year. And our economy grew, despite what they're saying. Up to May of this year, our economy was growing. It was growing up to May of this year, and I'm assured of that by former Minister of Finance, Ashley Singh. And this, what they're saying now, is totally misrepresenting our situation. And the only projects that they have so far are the projects that we have had in place. They have stopped a lot of them. For instance, we were ready to take our country to a much further level, but they seem to have abandoned their Mile of All project, which is a sad thing for this country, because everyone knows that cheap electricity is vital for economic development. And that's being said by everyone, even the president of the Caribbean Bank, when he came here and had the meeting here, and subsequently made that point. But our people are speaking about micro hydro project. They seem to be thinking only at micro level at this point in time. They have also reversed many of the things. I believe with all the practical things that we can demonstrate of our achievements, I believe one of the most fundamental things and one of the things that we must be most proud of is the freedom that we've given the Guyanese people. We never had a period of such freedom in our country, where freedom of speech, freedom of the press was upheld at every level. And I think that freedom translated in helping the economy to be pushed forward. We always used to say, this was a favorite slogan of Dr. Jagan, that you can't have sustained social and economic progress unless you have political democracy, and we lived by that. Today we see that is being reversed, constantly being reversed. Right now, lands are being taken away from people in the West Babis area, are being threatened to be taken away from them. You know also about the case where the people with title for their land in the so-called Prado 2 area, 1 and 2 area, there's now this attempt to try to seize people's property. This is a dangerous sign. You remember the famous saying by the priest, Martin, who said, they came for the communists, but I was not a communist, so I said nothing. They came for the Jew, but I was not a Jew, so I said nothing. It's the same thing that's going to be happening here. They're trying to look like if they're coming for political opponents, but all Guyanese will suffer in this regard. Racial and political discrimination is now one of the hallmarks, one of the characteristic features of the governance of this PNC clothing themselves as APNU regime at this time, where people are dismissed. Hundreds of people are being dismissed. Those who are being forced to resign from their job because of the atmosphere created in their workplace. These are great danger signs. And then we want to say that in this we must take the spirit of October 5th, 1992, and use the spirit of October 5th, 1992 to try to prevent these reversals from taking place, so that we can build on our achievement and not to break what we have achieved already. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, thank you for your attention.
Before statements, ask a question, state your name, your house you represent, who you direct the question. Yes.
Kurt Campbell, News Source. If I could start with the former president, since the mics are already there. You've offered some general criticism of the government, but if I could ask you to speak specific to the performance of your successor, the new president, Mr. Ukrajian, his performance over the last.
And you can't separate his performance from the performance of the government.
I know.
I mean, I'm not hearing him saying many. He's not stepping out of the crease very much at this point in time. I would say that we have already expressed our support for him and the government as far as the Venezuela issue is concerned. But there's not very much more that I could talk about his performance in that regard.
Adam Harris, Prime News, for my friend, Mr. Nandlal. You were looking at the judiciary, sir. how many judges, to your recollection, would have sued the then government for benefits that they said were denied them and for what they call discrimination? And how many cases would you recall were shelved? I remember one, the PSU appeal. The decision has not been handed down after what, 10 years or something, sir?
Let me deal with the PSU matter. The PSU decision was handed down, and the case may have taken some time to come up, but the case has been decided, and the PSU lost. The PSU lost. So that's that one. How many cases, how many judges sued which administration?
The PPP administration.
As far as I am aware, a judge, Justice Jai Narain Singh, who held the position of an acting judge, sued for pension, and the law of this country is pension is governed by statute, and you are only entitled to pension if you are confirmed in the position that carries pension. The position of an acting judge doesn't carry pension. In an attempt to reconcile the matter, I called the judge, I had conversations with him, I explained to him what the law is, I showed him what the law is, and it is a matter for the judiciary for them not to have confirmed him. So I believe that the action filed by the judge was misplaced, and a competent court will soon decide that.
Ramlal did sue you.
Justice Ramlal has filed an action claiming that he's entitled to certain facilities which the Chancellor and the Chief, or the persons holding the position of Chancellor and Chief Justice are entitled. The matter of sub judice, his matter is before the court. The court will decide whether Justice Ramlal has a good case or not.
No, see, the reason I asked is that you said it all was well in the judiciary. There are arguments that during the tenure of the PPP, there was the highest number of acting judges. There was the refusal at one stage to confirm a Judge James Boggle-Briggs by the PPP. And yes, and there was no move by the government to modernize the court, you know, with electronic recordings, modify the law, and all of that.
Adam, you lived during the period of PNC. The judiciary was a cloistered place. Nobody knew. If you speak to judges, I spoke to a man named Satrohan Singh, he's dead. He was a magistrate. He ruled in a matter at vigilance. He was a sitting magistrate. And he was told to leave the country after his ruling. And that was the fear that permeated the atmosphere at the time. Mr. Ashton Chase has written a book in which he wrote that many judges did not even wait for the president to call. They ruled in the manner in which they felt the president expected them to rule. It's written.
Well, the important thing, Adam, is that the executive never interfered with the decision of the judiciary. And that is what ensures the independence and the principle of the separation of powers within the society.
But also, just to add, the Judicial Service Commission and the other service commissions are appointed through a parliamentary mechanism. So unlike before, where the president appointed these service commissions, they are now appointed through a parliamentary mechanism, that is the Committee of Appointment. And that until you can get the 2/3, well, you can get 50% with the service commissions. And so there have been periods in the parliament where there was you had not set up these service commissions, and led to what you call a vacuum, because the president couldn't appoint anybody or anything like that. So you have to put these things in context and not just, make sweeping statements.
Significantly, Adam, the fact that a judge sued the Attorney General, that by itself tells you the type of independence and the type of environment that existed that conduced to a judge feeling comfortable to sue the executive and remains on the bench. That could not have happened prior to 1992. It didn't happen.
Mr. Chair, could you say where is the new location that has been identified for the new office of the...
Well, if we don't get furniture and our stuff for it, the building may have to be given up. We have a contract, but obviously we have identified a building which we think is a good building, accessible to the public, etc. And within the parliamentary confines of what is stipulated as rent for the building, because we don't have a, what you call, an open-ended arrangement. The parliament budget defines how much is acceptable. And so I would love to say where it is. Yeah, well, you know that already. San half you know that already. But anyway, the building cannot be occupied unless we have one of the assets that were purchased for the office that in any transition moves from one office to another. And you know, I want to remind you, all of you are very young here. When Chetty Jagan was the leader of the opposition, we had also the experience of the then PNC government taking away his office, which was provided by the parliament, just like this, except then it was smaller amounts of money, and also his security, and so forth. And that is how Chetty ended up, his office of the leader of opposition ended up at Freedom House, because the then government had removed. And that is why when we were in office, we enshrined these issues in the Constitution. The leader of opposition used to be called minority leader, and it was changed back to leader of the opposition, put in the Constitution, in the constitutional reform, both the office and the person who holds the post, and then and also enshrined in law, so that what has happened is that we have a place on Church Street. It is where originally the Surinamese embassy was, and SEMCO, and that's where we hope to establish our office.
Mr. Chair, could you say the PPP would be opposed to receiving new equipment and furniture, since the government has indicated that what was used before is now with you?
Well, this is an audit issue, isn't it? Taxpayers' money was given to the budget of something called the Leader of the Opposition Office. The Parliament Office purchased these things under that capital budget for the Office of the Leader of the Opposition. It was entered in the asset register of the Parliament Office, marked for the Leader of the Opposition, and handed over to the Leader of the Opposition Office on Hatfield Street. So you are suggesting, as many people, don't fight over this issue. I'm hearing people saying that. No, I'm not saying, I'm just saying, I'm hearing people say, don't make this a problem. Let Parliament go buy you more stuff. The problem is, there is a budget that is limited in Parliament. The budget for the Office of the Leader was a little less than 15 million. As of August, when the budget was passed, I was advised by Parliament Office there is $10 million left. Out of that $10 million, one pays for the rent, one pays for staff, and electricity and so on. So that the number of staff is also stipulated. We don't have an ended arrangement. So we have to pay for rent and all of these issues. The office of the Leader of the Opposition has informed Parliament he will not be accepting the salary of the Leader of the Opposition. So that, therefore, the only money the Leader of the Opposition has, and the office has, is that 10 million that has been budgeted for. If you're telling me that if you're telling me that out of that 10 million we make a choice, do we buy equipment and furniture, or do we pay people, or do we not pay the rent? My thing is a point of principle and financial regulations.
But I want to also say that from May to now is a hell of a long time.
5 months.
Not to be ready to hand over these things.
5 months.
We handed over the next day.
You know?
But
Next day we handed over.
I want to add at the political level the perception. When the PPPC government was alerted by the administration, the incoming administration, we were given a deadline when to hand over vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
We were given a deadline when to hand over cell phones.
Laptops.
We were given a deadline when to hand over cell phones, and certain sections of the media milked this.
Laptops.
They were even impugning corruption on the part of the outgoing administration, that we were stealing these things, that we were hiding these things. One person came out and said that they will look for every chair and every table and every bed. That is the property of the state.
Yeah.
I want to see the same media report this matter in the same way.
I want to add also that army officers were placed as sentries at the gates of ministries, regulating who can go in during this period when these properties were being sent back to the office of the president or transferred. That was the level of scrutiny that was brought to bear on this matter. So is that a question about they could keep it at their convenience, or is theirs, and therefore Parliament must go and buy it?
They're accounted for.
Go and buy
There
new
can't
one?
be a double standard, you know. Are we dealing with, you know, the issue was that accountability. And the issue is what is not available and cannot be accounted for are rather expensive issues. There are, you know, 13 laptops not there. When we asked where there, we were told by the representative, Mr. Harmon, that, well, they haven't been returned as yet, and it's difficult because they're in the regions. When we said in the regions where, he said, oh, offices. Well, we know what kind of offices those are. We're pretty certain what those offices are. You know, and those of us who've lived through this. And so we said, but when are they going to return? It's 5 months. Well, the issue then was the point about they have personal information, etc. on it. I reminded that in the transition period, this point was raised too, and the cabinet ministers and members had laptops that were 2007 purchased by the government. And the ministers were interested in purchasing them at a depreciated amount because they had personal information on it. The ruling of the APNU AFC coalition was absolutely not return. So everyone cleaned their computers as best as they could, clean their laptops as best as they could, and return them. We're being told now that 13 of these cannot be returned because they have, after 5 months, because they have personal information on, and seem to think that they can't be cleaned and they can't be cleared. Yet we had days to do this in, and we did it. The other expensive issues, printers, a number of printers cannot be accounted for. The television, a number of other furniture cannot be accounted for. So that, and additionally, more computers can't be accounted for. These are what you call the desktops and stuff like that. The Parliament Office was rather generous in acquiring a lot of this from their budget for the Opposition Office. In fact, some of the equipment date back to Corbyn's time, and Corbyn had refused to take up his office, and the equipment that had been purchased then for Corbyn was kept at Parliament, and then when Granger set up his office, those were moved to Mr. Granger's office. So we can't be talking through two sides of our mouth. We either stand for accountability and transparency, or we don't. And I agree with what Rui has said. We hope that this very, for me personally, this is absolutely unacceptable. That an agency, it's Parliament Office that manages the Leader of the Opposition Office, not Office of the President or Ministry of the President. Yet we're instructed and told, you cannot move on Monday. We are not ready. As if we are an arm of the government. We're not an arm of the government.
But be hiding something.
And the point is, they occupied that building both as government and opposition. So that office, which is Office of Leader of Opposition, suppose we'd wanted to go in and use that same office. That has been occupied from May 16th as an annex of the Ministry of Presidency, Office of the President. It's a functioning office, I can tell you that.
Yes, Ms. Dutch.
Liana and CN. On a separate matter, the family court, Mr. Namlal, you said that the family court is yet to be open and government needs to answer. Could you say why it was not open under the previous administration?
The executive government did everything possible for the court to have been opened. The judiciary is responsible for the drafting of the rules necessary for the functioning of the court. And the judiciary is also responsible for fixing a date to open the court.
And different,
The furniture has been installed. We purchased all
but
the
the family
furniture.
court rules were passed in the parliament several years ago. I see the chancellor saying
They
that
said that
there
they
are
have
new,
to undergo some amendments.
and in those rules it is the chancellor who gives some order that allows the court to start. But those rules were tabled in the House and passed in
That's
the House
correct.
around 2009, 2010.
The Latham court has been completed and was available for opening sometime in April, May. But then we had elections and so on. So 6 months have passed, it's not yet open.
Tom Connor.
Handel Duncan, HGP Net News. Mr. Ramator, just on a point of clarification. Last week, President Granger said that the economy started to show signs of anemia since 2014.
That's
Now,
an excuse.
You're saying
You
that,
tell him I say it's an excuse.
you're saying that that's not so.
That's not so.
Then are you saying that the president lied to the Guyanese people?
I would say that he probably had been badly advised about the situation of the economy.
In addition to
But you
that,
can do your own check, sir, and
In
that
addi-
is
in
go
ad-
on the World Bank, and the analysis done. What is it? It's the assessment that is done, the staff assessment done of Guyana by the IMF. That was, you go on the IMF website, the staff assessment, and all the staff assessments are there. And the one for 2014 was made public in one of the newspapers in Guyana that showed that we had positive growth. It pointed out that what were external uncertainties, and this was global, global risk and so on, which all countries face, whether it's the price of gold or the price of wood or whatever. But there was nothing in that IMF report and assessment done to say that Guyana was showing any signs of anemia.
I would say also that the government should, instead of thinking in a discriminatory way, that what would help the economy is if they help like the rice industry.
but
And all of these areas are areas that can stimulate the development of the economy, and where they're ignoring because for political and it seems to be for political and racial reasons.
AGTP, all of this is part of the political jargon of the APNU-AFC administration to make the PBPC administration look bad in every respect. Everything is wrong. You listen to many of the ministers of government, every sector went wrong under the PBPC. Now Mr. Granger is saying what you reportedly you have said. So it's part of the political jargon of the APNU-AFC to describe everything as bad under the PPC administration. But the key question I think we should ask is Mr. Granger an economic doctor to diagnose the ills of the economy?
Well, in all fairness, the IMF report did say from a projected 4.1%, the rate of recovery was being adjusted. The rate of growth,
Yeah.
was being adjusted to 3%,
Yeah.
which suggested that there was a decline.
Yeah, but that also talked about the global commodity prices.
Exactly.
So it was not an issue, but then the point of anemia is slightly different than a reduction of 1%.
Let him look at
But
from May to now.
But the point in the same report,
Why
it
we
talks
should argue
about the inflation levels actually maintained, and inflation is a consideration of how well the economy is doing. And in that report, although they're showing, and it wasn't as much as you're saying, but at the same time, the inflation rate remained low in 1 digit when other countries were showing 2 digits, and it was a point digit.
How could you
so that
have-
I think for the edification of the young journalists, go to
How could you have
the report and
the
you
economy
make your
suffer from anemia when,
analysis.
as former President Ramada said, for the past years, you've had sustained economic growth in the country.
In fact,
compared to the rest of the
in fact,
Caribbean.
Rohi, we're the second country, but Adam, we were the second country in this hemisphere as of the end of 2014 to have had positive economic growth. We were the second country. The first country was Peru, then us. And that is the same IMF reports. So the entire hemisphere we're in, the Western Hemisphere, we were the only 2 countries were showing positive economic growth, and we were number 2. Consistently over a 7-year period. when other countries were dropping. So, I mean, I believe that Mr. Ramatar is very kind in saying that
But
maybe Mr. Granger
it's
is
more
not being properly
pertinent for the
advised.
president to speak about the economy from May the 15th to now. Let him diagnose that.
Yeah.
That's where his responsibility is. They seem to forget that they're in government.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very much. You have one last question?
Yeah. John Bryan, K2 News. You have criticized this current administration.
Who are you directing the question to?
Farm President. Okay. You criticize this administration for its move on the Proud Bill 1 and 2 lands. Would you say that how the land was developed, how it was distributed?
That's one thing. That this seizing personal property. This attempt.
You have to read the motion.
The seizing of personal property. The people that title for the land. You can't do that.
Go back to
they're
your
doing the same thing
constitution.
in, not only in Pradoville, it's extending already. They're doing the same thing in Region 5. Right now they're doing the same thing in Region 5. For racial and political reasons too. Because in Region 5, there's a large black community whose lands are being taken away and given to PNC after this.
A black community?
Yes.
Yeah, Washington, Belladrum.
Lands are being taken away from
Adam,
those
you
people.
find out?
Adam hasn't picked that up yet.
But
But I just want to say to the young man, the Constitution makes it clear. When the Constitutional reform began, one of the issues that was critical to amend was the issue that there must be compensation for any expropriation, and that property could not be taken away without due process, courts, etc., 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 and compensation. I think you need to read the motion that has been submitted by Mr. Trotman. It is about expropriation. It is not concerned very much, and the press is getting confused. It is saying that because there's a view of Mr. Trotman in his head that the methodology was wrong, therefore, ipso facto, take away these people and do not do what is normal, that persons have a right to defend themselves. So the question is unconstitutional. The motion is unconstitutional, and the court should throw it out.
Thank you all very much.
Find out who's paying for the expensive lawyers who are doing that motion.
Who did I do?
McKay, Boston, them men who got a court free.
Where Trotman got money to do all that? Where Trotman got money for that?
Trotman is a pensioner.
I can't quarrel about.
He stopped grumbling on the TV. I don't see him no more, Channel 9.
I can't see them. I don't see them. I don't even see you.